Okay, it is 10 o'clock, and I call to order the meeting of the Michigan Board of State Canvassers. Director Brader, was the meeting properly noticed?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, the first order of business is public comment, and James Gallant has indicated that he wants to speak to us. He will be on Zoom. Mr. Gallant, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello? Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, James Gallant, Marquette County Suicide Prevention Coalition. These are my opinions. And please schedule a special meeting to review these rules of procedure and the constitutional requirements to follow Robert's Rules of Order. I don't know where the 2 minutes came from on the minutes for now. You changed it all and you didn't even vote on that. But Robert's Rules of Order, there's 3 questions that we have on this. Robert's Rules of Order was created as a direct interpretation of the proceedings of the U.S. House of Congress of Representatives, creating a semblance of order for the state and federal and local governmental deliberative assemblies like yourself, so people can be part of multitude of boards with similar rules. This is what created our semblance of order in this country, was Robert's Rules of Order. And Mr. Brader says that questions are required to be in the affirmative under the Constitution. Yes means yes, no means no. Yet you have no questions on your agenda today. You just have considerations and discussion. And as we saw in the governor's race last year, you on occasion deny a petition. So you vote yes to mean no, in direct contradiction of the Constitution. And also, we have the part about please schedule a public meeting with a public hearing so that we can just get this out and you can make a decision. We get the Attorney General here and we can get this really resolved instead of you just following this deliberative democracy thing where you have the deliberation first and then you have the motion after you already made the decision. That's Marxism. That's not even our form of government. And it's like the elected officials, Governor Whitmer appointed you to install Marxism into our democracy. And it's all, I have put in a written statement and it's got all of the on the internet where it talks all about this, how to instill Marxism into democracies in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Gallant.
So please do that, okay?
You know, we have heard you on a number of occasions, and we have your comments in the minutes of the meeting, and we do review the minutes, so we understand your concerns. So thank you for zooming in with us. The next item on the agenda is consideration of the meeting minutes for the May 19th, 2023 meeting. Do we have a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes from the May 19th, 2023 meeting.
And I'll second that. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, the motion carries. The next item is consideration of the proposed modification to approved HART intercivic voting system, HART Verity Print. Do you want to tell us what this is about, Director Brader?
Certainly. Thank you. So this device, as part of the approved configuration that the Election Assistance Commission certified for the HART voting system, basically it's a device that allows you to print a ballot for any voter, regardless of what precinct or ballot style they're in. So this is something that other states have used for a while, but we did not review last year when the Board of State Canvassers considered the HART system, because at that time we didn't have early voting, so there wasn't really much need for that. Under traditional polling place voting in Michigan, each precinct will have 1 or perhaps 2 ballot styles. And so at a polling place, you can have up to 6 precincts there, but it isn't really necessary currently with the polling place model to have ballot printing on demand, because you can just pre-print all the ballots you need. You know basically what ballot voters are going to need, and when they show up, you just have that stack of ballots for them. But with early voting, it's going to work a little bit differently, at least in many places, because with early voting under Proposal 2022-2, you can have an entire city or even an entire county with multiple cities all voting at one shared early voting site. And that means that you could have potentially dozens or even hundreds of different ballot styles, depending on who the voter is. And you're also probably going to have a relatively low volume of people each day, compared at least to Election Day polling place voting. So in that situation, it's more practical in a lot of cases, rather than to print and bring to the early voting site dozens or hundreds of different ballot styles and printing, just kind of guessing how many you're going to need and having them printed in advance. The Verity print device, you basically program it so that it can print whatever ballot style you need, and then you put in ballot paper and print a ballot for someone when they show up. It's a paper ballot, they mark it, and then it goes in the tabulator. So again, it's a useful tool, but it just isn't something that we've needed in Michigan until now. Now we do need it, so we are recommending that this device be approved by the Board of State Canvassers for use in the 11 counties that use Hart intercivic voting systems. I stayed under 2 minutes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to time you, Director Bruder. We have questions?
Are there any security implications from a ballot standpoint with this?
You can test these ballots the same way that you would test pre-printed ballots. I mean, essentially, the way we print ballots, the way we test ballots that are printed currently, we obviously don't test every single ballot of the thousands that come out. We print a ballot that's of the same format, and then we test that. So you would do the same procedures here with these ballots. Again, it's a paper ballot that's printed out, that's marked by the voter. So it doesn't eliminate the paper trail or anything like that. So I don't think it really raises any additional security concerns.
Is this attached to their hardware? This is a hardware dependent modification?
Yeah, it sort of looks like well, when it comes to Hart, the device looks a little bit like the scanner or like the voter assist terminal, the Verity Touch Writer, and then you have to have a commercial printer that you attach to it that can handle the ballot stock. But yeah, you need to have this device, physical device, to print the ballots.
The obvious question is that no one can access a print function outside of a piece of Hart's piece of equipment. I can't log in somewhere and print ballots.
Right. This would not be connected to the internet.
Okay.
So, yeah.
The process of I'm trying to think through my question. The process of a printer malfunction or the voter spoils the ballot. That's all. All of this is logged the same way with ballots that would be pre-printed. I'm trying to think, we've got, maybe there's 2 different sites in the county that have early voting set up, and somebody with the tab numbering and things like that, how is that the tear off tabs, and how does that get properly tracked, I guess? I don't know if my question makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, so there's a couple things. I mean, one, we're working on an early voting poll book tool that will check in voters at an early voting site, and that will verify that you can't vote at 2 different for early voting sites if you're the same person. In a lot of places, there's only going to be 1 early voting site that you can choose from, so that's not really going to be an issue. But in the event that you might have multiple sites, that we will have a way of telling that you voted at 1 early voting site. So that's in terms of the individual. In terms of tracking, in terms of the ballot numbering, it's still, I'd have to go back and look at the way that numbering would work on these printed ballots, but regardless of whether it would be the same tear off, you can still record a number for the ballot that you printed for an individual, and that can still be recorded, in a poll book the same way that you would record the physical stub number in a paper ballot. And the Verity print device does keep a log of every ballot that was printed, and it keeps it by ballot style. So there still would be a chain that you could look back at to see how many ballots of each type were issued, and then in the check-in tool, you would still have a way of indicating the ballot that was issued to that voter.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
So they would be numbered sequentially at an early voting site, is that correct?
We haven't figured that out yet exactly in terms of how they're going to number, like how early voting ballots will be numbered in terms of the sequence and how that will differ from like absentee ballots and in-person ballots. It will make sense to have a range, in my opinion, that is, you know, traceable to the early voting site, but we haven't yet figured out, you know, whether they will have a specific number sequence or whether, you know, they will start with an E or something as opposed to an A, which sometimes they start absentee ballots with. But there would be some way of distinguishing them.
And are these going to be used for printing ballots on Election Day as well?
I don't think so. I don't think that would be practical because, again, on Election Day, at the polling place, you know, when you come to a precinct, everybody at that precinct is going to have the same ballot style, or maybe you might have two if you have a school district or something, but it'll still be more practical on Election Day to just have a bunch of pre-printed ballots for people because you have, you know, only a few different types of ballots that you use. It's different in an early voting site where you could have hundreds of different ballot styles potentially, and that's where, you know, there's a lot of potential waste of taxpayer money if you're trying to print a bunch of extra ballots to have enough for anybody who might show up at an early voting site.
Director Brader, is it safe to assume this is like a component for more stuff coming that will be involved with early voting?
Yeah, I mean, this is an important part of making the early voting sites more efficient. But there's a lot more, and I mean, this technology already exists and is used in other states. There's a lot more coming. I mentioned that we're working right now on the early voting poll book tool. We are also going to need different procedures in terms of like sorting ballots and sealing ballot containers and preparing for the canvass. That's probably going to depend a little bit on which device, you know, which vendor is being used. It'll depend on how many sites there are, whether there are shared different municipalities within a county, and a few other things like that. But those are procedures that we're developing right now. We just got the legislation passed, which provides some of those details, but a lot more of it we're going to need to develop working with the municipal and the county clerks.
So with 11 counties, including Oakland, on this particular system, are you anticipating there will be similar preprints and things like that for other systems or for other counties?
Yeah, so the Dominion counties, which are 65 of them, though they can use the ICX, the voter assist terminal. They can use that as a ballot on demand device, and that functionality was included in the Dominion upgrade that the board approved recently. So that works, you know, somewhat the same way, except instead of using a different device, you're using the voter assist terminal to print out the ballot for the voter. For ES&S, which is used in 7 counties, we're talking to them now about that. I'm not sure, you know, they also have a ballot on demand product, but we haven't quite worked out with them whether or not that's going to be something that they recommend using for this election. It also may be the case that there will be fewer shared sites among the ES&S counties, so that might lessen the need for having a ballot on demand device. Like, for example, if, you know, in Macomb County, there's not a big county-wide site, and each city and township just has their own site, that would lessen the need for having a device where you could have all these different types of ballots.
Last question for you, for me anyway. Are we assuming that this particular device is packaged under the same guidelines that the actual voting machine is packaged, so it's secured the same way, it's protected by law the same way?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything further? Okay, do we have a motion?
Yeah, let me get to the page here. Madam Chair, I move that the Board of State Canvassers modify the Verity 2.6 system approval to include Verity Print as one of the approved system components.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, the next item on our agenda is consideration of the form of the petition submitted by Michigan Justice Advocacy. Director Brader, do you want to advise us about this?
Sure. So this is an initiation of legislation petition. The board previously approved the 100-word summary for this. So they have now come back with the form of the petition. This is something that the board approves basically as a courtesy for the circulators. It's not required by law, but it gives them an opportunity to give us a copy that we can verify meets the statutory requirements. And so we did get a copy of this, and we reviewed it, and we believe it does comply with the statutory requirements. We also have a printer's affidavit. Anything to add, Adam? Nothing from me. Okay. Since Jeanette's not here, I'll just note, I know that Board Member Bradshaw generally votes against this, but I think in this case she'd be okay with it because the 100 words been approved, right? Yeah, so Board Member Bradshaw doesn't agree with like the policy of doing approval as to form until we've approved the 100-word summary. We generally will do it, or the staff will generally recommend it to you just because of the efficiency of having one meeting versus two. But in this case, it didn't matter because they didn't have the form ready last time. So we can talk about it more with the next one. Actually, it won't matter for that one either. So that's all.
Okay, any questions?
Just from, I noted the fact that we had discussed this back in March. The delay was just a simple matter of the organization getting the printer's affidavit and getting things lined up, correct? There wasn't anything else related to it, nothing on our end, no requirement we made of them before coming back?
No.
Okay.
Anything else? Do we have a motion?
I move that the board approve the form of the initiative petition submitted by Michigan Justice Advocacy with the understanding that the board's approval does not extend to, 1, the substance of the proposal, which appears on the petition, or 2, the manner in which the proposal language is affixed to the petition.
I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the consideration of the form of the petition submitted by Michigan Initiatives for Action. You want to tell us about this, Director Brader?
Sure. So this is another petition for initiation of legislation involving changes to FOIA that would expand it to additional state officials. Now, for this petition, the sponsor did not request that I draft or the board approve the 100-word summary for the petition that will go on the face of the petition. There's no obligation for sponsors to do that. It's totally up to them. However, if they do request that I draft it and you approve it, then the board is then precluded from considering challenges at a later date that this summary was misleading. So because they didn't do that, if this comes up, you'll be able to consider it if somebody wants to say, this 100-word summary was misleading. That's the only real difference there. So what we are doing here, again, is with this petition is the courtesy approval as to form. So this does not apply either to the 100-word summary or the substance of the proposal. So again, I think, I don't want to speak for Chair Bradshaw, but I think this would be, Member Bradshaw, sorry, Chair Gerwitz. I don't think she'd have an issue with this one either because this is the last time we're going to see this, basically. But in any case, this is approval that will apply to the form as opposed to the substance.
And John Clore has asked to speak to this agenda item. Mr. Clore? You want to press the button so that there's a little red button or a little button, yeah. There. No, there you
There
are.
we go. Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is John Clore. I am the founder of Michigan Initiatives for Action. Today, I sit before you to discuss a critical initiative that has the potential to transform our government and enhance transparency and accountability in Michigan. I'm here to talk about the Transparency Act and its profound significance for our state. The Transparency Act is a groundbreaking initiative that seeks to amend Act 442 of 1976, specifically targeting the executive and legislative branches. Its primary aim is to hold these branches accountable by subjecting them to public information requests under the Freedom of Information Act. Why is this important? Transparency and accountability are the bedrock of a thriving, open, and honest society. When the people have access to essential government information, they can make informed decisions, hold their elected representatives accountable, and actively participate in the process. This initiative aims to empower citizens, ensuring that public records and documents are readily available to all. Imagine a government where citizens have access to the information they need to understand the decision-making process, where accountability is not just a buzzword in Lansing, but a lived reality. This initiative aims to transform this vision into a reality. It will pave the way for a more inclusive and participatory system where citizens are actively engaged in shaping their government. Today, I urge each and every one of you to support this initiative. Let us stand together in demanding a government that is transparent, accountable, and responsive to its citizens. Let us ensure that our voices are heard, that our concerns are addressed. In conclusion, this is not just an initiative. It is a symbol of our collective commitment to a better, more transparent future. Together, let us seize this opportunity to make a lasting impact on Michigan's governance. Together, let us build a government that truly serves the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clore. You have asked us to support this initiative, but our only task here is to approve the form of your petition. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Clore? Do we have a motion?
I move that the board approve the form of the initiative petition submitted by Michigan Initiatives for Action with the understanding that the board's approval does not extend to 1, the summary of purpose as it appears on the heading of the petition, 2, the substance of the proposal which appears on the petition, or 3, the manner in which the proposal language is affixed to the petition.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the motion carries. The next item on the agenda is continued discussion of updates to petition processing. So in accordance with our request that we form a working group to consider proposed changes to the petition processing and also any other changes which we might want to see, Vice Chair Hauskamp and I and many members of the Bureau of Elections met with a number of people who have been practicing regularly before the board. We had a really good group representing people who had worked on ballot questions, who had been proponents of ballot questions, and opponents of ballot questions, people who had represented candidates and opposed candidates. And we had a really good and helpful discussion. We have not finished, but it was extremely useful. We came up, a number of suggestions were raised. One of the more important ones from my perspective was that we will probably be recommending, although we're not ready to do it today, recommending that the Bureau urge legislation to authorize the procedures which we follow. And we would suggest that that legislation should be a pretty broad grant of authority, which gives us a fair amount of discretion to use the procedures that we think are most apt for a particular situation. So we don't want to tie us to any particular procedure, but we want to have the ability, for example, to use random sampling, either for candidate petitions, which we do not currently use random sampling for, and also for initiative and referendum petitions. We think that that would also, we need also to address probably in legislation fairly broadly, again, what kind of examination of the petitions is either should be required, or whether examination of the petitions, which we call face check, whether that is currently required, whether there need to be changes to the statutes which make the job of the Bureau of Elections easier, but just as perhaps even more effective. I think it became clear, at least to me, that the face check, which has been used with regard to candidate petitions in the past, it's pretty surface, as it needs to be, because there isn't time to do something which is really comprehensive, and that random sampling of candidate petitions will probably be an effective way of revealing forgery and I think that there was some recognition that perhaps forgeries had escaped the notice previously. I know that we had after the Raymond report, we asked the Bureau to do random sampling on the Craig petitions, which revealed that the petitions were even more defective than we had earlier understood from the examination of the petitions that was done. So we think that some legislation will be necessary. We would like to make some recommendation probably at our August meeting, because the legislature will be back in session. There were other suggestions made about changing the filing deadlines for statewide drives and candidates. That's something that just probably has to be considered generally. There was a suggestion that the Board of Canvassers could encourage early filing of candidates so that they don't all file at the same time, so that the Bureau and the board are not faced with one meeting where they examine all of the candidates' petitions. So if there were early filing, there might then necessitate a board meeting to consider an earlier filing. Am I clear on that one? Yeah. That would be sort of complicated in terms of giving notice to opponents to examine petitions if they weren't all filed. I guess they're not all filed at the same time now anyway, but the objections are all due at the same time. So there could be some way of sequencing things so that the Bureau's consideration and our consideration could be, would not necessarily be all at the same time. Let me look at my notes here. Okay, we also considered, and this is probably not something for us to determine, but there were suggestions that instead of nominating petitions for candidates, that candidates be allowed to either file a filing fee or nominating petitions. That's something for the legislature to consider. I don't think that's something we would make a recommendation on, but it was interesting that that was enthusiastically supported by both Republican and Democratic attorneys In fact, they said that they were fist bumping, I'll tell you, and saying that they would go to the legislature to encourage this. And certainly for people who are representing candidates, that would be easier. Whether it is something that we would want to do, that the legislature would want to do, remains to be seen.
Was there any discussion as to why, like, state legislative candidates have that choice, but federal candidates do not, gubernatorial candidates do not?
There was, at least for judicial candidates, there have been suggestions that it's sort of an incumbent protection provision, but I don't know. This is something of longstanding, I believe. You would know that.
It's one of those things, just the way we do it, so that's why we do it that way, kind of?
Well, it's in the statute, so, and I don't know whether it's always, I don't know what the history of those requirements is.
They had suggested that it was possible that that was designed to keep clutter from showing up on the ballots. That was a comment that was made that wasn't supported. It was
Yeah,
simply.
not necessarily clutter, but having a ballot which is excessively long. Although I think it would depend on the size of the filing fee. It's not going to, it would presumably not be $100 or $125. It might be 10,000 or something. I don't know what kind of provisions there are in other states.
Sorry to interrupt, on the issue of suggesting legislation for some of these things, would that then preclude the need for us to adopt these for this next go-around, or we would do both of those?
I think we would do both, but we could feel more confident in adopting procedures if there were legislative authority, because what became so apparent when we were having discussions was that the procedures which the board has been following for many decades, which have been approved periodically when there have been judicial challenges, but those procedures are not statutory. I did take a quick look at some other state provisions for petition processing. I want to do more of that, but I think probably most of them, certainly all the ones that I looked at, have statutes which set forth how they are going to process petitions. So I think I would like to hear Director Brader address that as well. But both with regard to legislative changes and perhaps legislative authorizations to make rule changes or to adopt rules, because we haven't done that. Member Bradshaw is now here, and she's always urging us to adopt rules to govern many of the decision-making responsibilities that we have. And finally, we did have an interesting discussion about whether to revert to substantial compliance instead of strict compliance standard. That would also require probably some legislative changes, but it is something we thought worthy of consideration. Because that was, at least until the Stand Up for Democracy case in 2012, that was the standard, substantial compliance, and I don't think that it was particularly difficult for the board to make those determinations. As I understand it, the board was required to make determinations in cases that were close. So anyway, that is, we're not deciding anything today, but we're putting food for thought. The other significant discussion that we had was that we should investigate other state procedures for petition processing, and particularly with regard to the adoption of technology, which would make the job of the Bureau easier and fairer and more efficient. And I'm going to ask Vice Chair Hauskamp to address the technology issue because he's particularly interested in it, and we've discussed that.
Yeah, we discussed the idea in the working group of potentially being able to glean data with a high-speed scan and actually accomplish a couple things with that. Number one would be, in the short term, would be to use technology to perform the bulk of the face checks. That could require that that the petition forms themselves have some kind of a structural change in order to be captured. We looked at the idea of being able to validate whether most of the information was accurate and correct. Adam, I think you raised the issue of sometimes the signature collector is a scribbled in field or is not always legible, as well as a lot of the signatures sometimes are not legible. We also talked about the technology being able to, if not accomplish 100%, at least accomplish some alleviation of the human effort. Longer term, the technology could be used for actually performing validation of signatures against the qualified voter file. The work that's being done right now with things like the artificial intelligence, the machine learning for pattern recognition. There are other organizations in industry and there are other organizations in government that are using signature validation electronically. So again, there were no conclusions. There were simply a lot of ideas that were talked about. And I guess I would close it by saying, Director Brader, you and Adam both are going to a conference here shortly with other election groups from around the country. You're going to be exposed to ideas and processes and things that are in place, and we kind of left the technology hang a little bit on that. And along with that statement comes a request that you investigate and bring back maybe practices that other states are using. I know we talked about Arizona, we've talked about Missouri, we've talked about Colorado.
So, Director Brader, you said that you wanted to address what you have been doing since our working group met?
Sure, yeah. So, Member Hauskamp, yes, we are going to the State Election Directors Conference in a couple weeks. So we certainly plan to, or is it next week? It's next week. So we plan to talk to some of the states that are there about the technology they use and see how it's working for them. I do think that it would obviously save a lot of time and open up that time for other things if we were able to validate certain elements of the petition or potentially even match signatures using the technology. But we definitely will see what they're using and how it's working. I'll also say in terms of kind of the question about that Member Daunt raised regarding legislative requests versus things that the board can do now. When the Bureau originally made its recommendations in the spring, that was, those recommended changes in our view were all things that the board could do under current law. Obviously, the board heard from people that had a variety of opinions about what statutes needed to change or should change regardless. But I do think that number one, there certainly are some things the board can still do now without waiting for legislative enactments. And two, I agree that what we have done now, essentially with the manual and various other documents, is try to summarize the statutes, the board's practice, and court decisions in kind of one comprehensive place, which we've, I think, been successful in doing. But certainly, it wouldn't hurt to have that more clearly laid out in one place, like whether it be in statute or elsewhere. I do think that one of the things that the board will need to decide fairly soon is the process that the board's going to use when it comes to the petitions that come in for this election cycle. And I don't think that Yeah, I don't think the board can, it's possible, but I don't think the board can necessarily expect that the legislature is going to make changes in time, to affect the next cycle. It's possible, but that's obviously not a certainty at all. And so one of the things that we talked about was the reaction to the initial recommendation we made when it came to initiative petitions, and the elimination of the random sampling and some of the other things that we could do to streamline that process. So when it comes to the initiative petitions, as we've gone over, there's sort of 5 things that we have to do with those. 1, we do a face review of the entire petition. 2, we have to sort them by number of signatures per sheet as part of the counting process, sometimes quicker if the drives have pre-sorted them for us, but it still takes a while. We also have to count the sheets and the signatures. We have to stamp them, and we have to make them available for scanning by either the proponents or the opponents of the petition. So in our initial recommendation, the thing we identified as taking the longest was the face review. That takes about 2/3 of the time. So that's about, I think, comes out to about 20 days. Is that right? 20 days. So that was where we had, sort of, with the recommendation, determining based on Raymond's analysis that it didn't affect the validity of the sampling process, where we had recommended eliminating it. That's still our view is the best approach, but we also looked at sort of, could we, what else can we do to streamline the process besides eliminating face review, and how much time could that save us? So one thing that we are looking at doing, and we've tested out a little bit, is basically combining the counting, the stamping, and the allowing scanning, so 3, 4, and 5 steps that I mentioned, essentially into one process where we scan all the sheets in, can easily count those sheets based on, the PDF it generates, the number of sheets there, and then also we would have that scan available for anybody who wanted to FOIA it, so we wouldn't have to let the drives come in and, carve out time for that. So that's something that we can do regardless of whatever we do with changes to random sampling. Right now, we've done some tests on that. We think it'll work. I don't think I can say definitively that we're ready to go in that direction, but probably, if the board wants to do that, that will be a viable option for us. And so that'll save a little bit of time. It does have some downsides, like when you scan everything, it makes it a little harder to go back and retrieve the original signatures, but overall, it probably would save some time. The other thing that we looked at was something that Member Hauskamp suggested, which is in lieu of eliminating random sampling, could we do a more streamlined, I'm sorry, not eliminating random sampling. Instead of eliminating face check, we would keep random sampling. Instead of eliminating the face check at the beginning of random sampling, could we do a more streamlined face check and save some time that way, and possibly combine it with a sorting step? So we tested that out, and we did sort of a sample face check where instead of looking at like the 15 to 19 points that we review every sheet for, cutting it down to about 8 and seeing how much time that spent. So basically, we would be focusing less on some of the individual level things that take more time to review, and we would be eliminating sheets on face review only if there were certain more clear elements that are faster to look at. What that would mean is more sheets would make it into the random sample and then get determined to be invalid once they were pulled, because we would then see that issue that we would have identified during face check. Again, that won't affect, I don't think, the statistical validity of the process, but that would be shifting some more of the rejections to the random sampling process as opposed to the face check. What we found was that it does, we were able to save a little bit of time with a streamlined face check. It saved a total of, we would estimate, of about 2 days out of that 20 days to do a more streamlined check. It does save a few seconds per sheet, but it wouldn't be like a game changer in the same way that eliminating the face check prior to the random sample would be. So that's something that, depending on what the board wants to do for this cycle, that we could incorporate in an updated random sampling. So we could take some of the recommendations. Again, we still do need an updated software program. We still want to eliminate like the shuffling of sheets and some other things. But if the board does not want to eliminate the face check prior to the random sample, another option, which would save us a bit of time, would be to streamline that face check a little bit.
I have two questions. You mentioned combining steps 3, 4, 5, which would allow for the counting, scanning, and stamping. You mentioned, as you continued, you talked about it would take care of the counting and take care of the scanning, but how would the stamping take place?
I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's possible to apply a digital stamp, basically, like a Bates number for like litigation documents. You can use the software to put a digital stamp on each sheet. And then we still would need to go back and find the actual sheet, the actual paper sheet, so we knew which sheet we were talking about, and that would be the one we were reviewing. But we wouldn't have to like hand stamp all those sheets.
And my second question was, you mentioned from the scanning process that once it's scanned, it's available if people wanted a FOIA. Would it be possible just to make it available so they don't have to go through the FOIA process? Like just, a fee or just put it online? I mean.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly look at streamlining that. I mean, the goal would not be to make it unnecessarily difficult.
Thank you.
So as I understand it now, parties come in, they bring their scanner, and they, we heard from Mr. Grebner how difficult it was for him to function in your office. But as I understand it, we're now the Bureau, it has high-speed scanners, and you will scan all of the petitions, and those scanners will number the petitions?
That's our plan right now, yeah.
Okay. And then those, that generates a PDF, I think. And then those will be made available to anyone who wants to challenge, correct?
Yeah, or the sponsor as well.
Right, to both the sponsor and the opponent. So they wouldn't need to FOIA them. There would just be an understanding that those are available to people.
Yeah, there would need to be some request process. It wouldn't necessarily need to be a FOIA.
Right,
But,
okay.
yeah.
So that, that certainly sounds like a step in the right direction. I looked at Arizona, which was so interesting. They have petition management software. And I think it sounds like they have a very standard form, which, because of the standardization, makes it easier to have those forms examined by, I don't even know the terminology, by, using whatever software they have rather than having people physically examine the form. So I think that's, that there are a whole lot of steps that can be taken either initially now, or we could be planning, I think, for some steps that will take us in the direction of implementing technology when it's available.
Yeah, I think that there are things that we can do now without having that level of technology, but I don't think it's an either or. I think we can keep exploring technological solutions while we make some initial, the scanning and automated numbering is a technological solution, so we'd be doing that. But we can look at more sophisticated things like that and then figure out, based on what would work for us, how to either incorporate that into this updated procedure or review the whole procedure and change it to incorporate that. But it's we can do both at the same time. There's not a either or there.
You know, a question I think we raised it once before, and so again, I'm coming out of left field on it. But one potential here is if we're looking at a larger change, a more extensive process change that would automate, that would perhaps do the printing on demand of petitions that we had talked about before. A number of the technology changes that might not be short-term. And you're concerned with this next election cycle. Is it remotely possible that we could create something that says for this next election cycle, we're using a slim down or more in line with what Raymond was recommending on a simple temporary basis for one cycle while these other changes were being considered? I may not be phrasing that correctly, but is it possible to give you a free pass for one cycle and come back and say, okay, you know, we have a bigger plan to implement?
That might be a question for the Attorney General's office. I'm not sure why the board could not do a time-limited motion, like set a policy for a time certain that would expire. I don't think there's anything prohibiting the board from doing that. I'm not sure if it has done that before, but I don't think there's a reason they could not do that.
And if the Attorney General's office does render on that, the attached question to that is that it's not an experiment that would be open to debate afterward. It's simply a convenience that we're putting in for one cycle, with the idea that there's a larger process that's in the works that couldn't be met in time.
If I may
Sure.
interject, my I guess concern on putting a timeline or something like that would be potential future confusion for no reason, whereas I view our existence and our setting these standards and putting them in place. If we don't like how it works, we can always come back and change it at our discretion or our prerogative. It's probably a distinction without much of a difference in that, but
That resonates. That makes sense. Yeah.
The petition processing manual is revised periodically. And it will be revised to say that we're scanning and making available the petitions, right, to the sponsor and to whomever else. So presumably, what Member Hauskamp is suggesting would be, we would be regularly updating. But we would, regardless of what we do for this upcoming cycle, we want to keep pushing.
Well, yeah, that's the idea. Is it's a trade-off here. So if we let the Raymond piece go through in some fashion for this cycle to take the pressure off of elections, petitions processing, we would still be pursuing full steam ahead with the idea of making process and technology changes that would put Michigan into a kind of a leadership role and also make it easier for you long-term with a lot more flexibility.
well, the beauty is, whatever we do, somebody will probably sue us, so that'll help provide some clarity too, so.
But we can make it not necessarily harder for them to sue us, but if we have, I know that this was something that Mr. Lidl was talking about when we discussed this earlier, about the fact that we don't have statutory authorization for what we do. We would be in a better position in terms of future litigation. I think Heather could probably speak to this, but in a better position if we did have more explicit statutory authorization. Is that something that you would welcome, Heather? You're the one who has litigated umpteen cases.
Well, I would say it's always easier to make a defense if we can point to something right in the statute, but we've been defending you for, I've been defending you for a very long time now, and, you know, the board's made decisions through, based on, you know, policies approved by motion. We've done things based on practice and procedure, and some things are based directly in statute. So, you know, we have good arguments usually for all the things that we do, but certainly to point specifically to a statute or to administrative rule that you adopt would make it harder for people to pursue litigation against you.
Thank you. So, this one other thought I had. With regard to the Raymond analysis, I think we were, presented with their recommendations regarding random sampling. What do you think about having either Michigan State or the University of Michigan look at the random sampling recommendations? I know that to give it sort of an official imprimatur. Does that make sense?
One of the sticking points with the Raymond recommendation, which we've all chatted about offline here and in the meetings, is the simplistic approach to using some Excel spreadsheets and a Visual Basic, in effect, macro that does your randomization and your sample selection. And there are options there that are probably more robust options that are still not hard to implement. And we had talked before about potentially getting someone from a Michigan State or a U of M.
I'm a Michigan person myself.
I know, and I'm trying to be really careful here. I'm a Calvin grad, so we could name all of the universities in Michigan, but the point being is that there are academics that have that might be able to guide on the algorithm that was used and the method that was used.
Yeah, we can certainly look at having external entities, and obviously we do have a lot of good academic institutions to choose from here, to look at, sort of give a second opinion on that, both in terms of the methodology and in terms of the software. One thing that we'll have to look at internally is just, we did go through like a public bidding process to get the consultant that we did to do this, so we'll have to look at, I imagine there'd be ways that we could work with the university communities outside of that, but we can figure out a way to have someone take another look at both the methodology and the technology.
The offhanded question is that would that random sampling be, would a second opinion on method of algorithm, is it worth it to get the random sampling in a short order? I mean,
In terms of without the face review, or?
turning that around, that would not be a long-term piece of information to gather. That would be getting a second opinion on how that random sampling was driven, what the statistical process was to drive that, and how it would be driven, is that's a fairly easy thing to get and a fairly short-term thing to get. That would not delay this process inordinately, I don't think.
I would hope not.
I guess that's a question.
I don't believe so, but we'd have to ask. We have to see who can help us and how quickly. But yeah, it doesn't seem like, to me, not being an expert on the math or the technology, it doesn't seem like it would take a huge amount of time.
Are you required, in order to get an opinion, for example, from Michigan State or from U of M, to approach them even to discuss it? Are you required to go through a formal process to do that, or do you have the latitude, or do we have the latitude to simply reach out and ask the question?
I don't think we need to go through a formal process for that, because we're not if we're not purchasing anything in that context, so probably not.
You're not buying anything
Right.
at that point.
Right.
Okay.
I'm looking at Heather's questioning face, but
I think it might, I think even if we didn't have to do an RFP, we would still probably have some kind of agreement with parameters. And
I'm sorry.
we would still need to probably have an agreement with some parameters in it. So I'm just going to point out that I'm not sure it's as easy as Richard, as Member Housecamp maybe is suggesting. It seems to me it would still take months from my perspective. But, you know, that's something that the AG's office and Bureau of Elections can talk a little bit more about. Because I think we'd want to have something set up, some kind of agreement with some parameters, I think, so that if somebody challenged things later, you know, there would be a way to point to sort of what the work order kind of thing was, what we were looking at.
In terms of our timeline, when do we anticipate that petitions may start coming in? I mean, they could come anytime, I understand.
Yeah, right. I mean, we just approved these two, so they could start coming, I mean, they can start collecting, I mean, theoretically, we could get things later this year. Usually, I don't know what their plans are, but they could definitely be planning to go out this summer and then bring them in the fall or in the winter.
And not to totally derail where we are right now, these two are the only two that are active that we have approved at this point, correct? And then there was the national popular vote. We approved something related to them prior to this last election cycle, if I recall correctly. They never did anything. Is that approval still good, or they need to come back to do something? Okay.
Yeah, they'll need to come back. I mean, obviously they could
bring the same stuff back.
bring the same thing back, but when there is that gubernatorial election, it acts as a reset, and they would need to do a new 483A filing and sort of start the process.
Okay. Thank you.
So we have a little time.
Yeah, I mean, we were planning on, at some point, in the next couple of months, asking the board, coming back to the board with an updated recommendation, asking the board to approve the procedures for this cycle, whatever they end up being. I mean, the board needs to approve something. As Heather pointed out, depending on how we were to engage with universities, like if we were to bring them on as retained consultants, I do think that would take longer, as she mentioned. So I don't know how we could work that in. But whatever we do, I think the board should approve something sometime in the next couple months before we get too far into the fall.
And then when, this is going back to the earlier discussion that we had about changes to election procedure and early voting. When is the first election, when there will be early voting?
There'll definitely be early voting for the presidential primary, whatever date or dates that may be. But it's required for that. We are also hoping to have some communities start doing early voting in November so that we can, have some test runs before we're in a statewide election. So, our goal is that some jurisdictions will be doing early voting for November for whatever local elections they have.
And that's not required by Prop 2 or by the statute. Local elections do not have to have early voting. It's
Right.
statewide elections and federal elections.
That's right. But local jurisdictions can have them, and our expectation is going forward, some communities will choose to have early voting for their local races, and others will not. But regardless, it definitely will be helpful for the entire state if we can have some in November, so we can troubleshoot some issues that might come up before we have a statewide race.
Okay. Any other questions for? I don't think so. Well, I think we're really making progress, and we're going to become national leaders in election technology.
You're bringing back bling bags from the conference, right?
They're going to Charleston, South Carolina. That's a nice place to go.
Rather go in the winter, but yes.
I don't,
July's the time to go, but.
I don't know what the hurricane forecast is, but we'll watch. Right. Does anyone have any other business? Hearing, Heather, do you have a litigation update?
I don't think there's anything new to report. We have a few cases that are still pending, but Eric's got those, and we didn't connect before our meeting today, but there's certainly nothing urgent for the board right now.
Thank you. Okay, if we have no other business, the meeting will be closed at 11:04. And we have our next meeting on August 1st.
As of now, tentatively, for recall. Yes.
6 of them?
Which looks like it also should be short, since they're all the
Yes,
same,
yes.
right?
Yes.